The office was almost empty when she asked me to stay. Most of the others had already slipped out, their laughter echoing faintly down the hallway before fading into the hum of the elevators. It was one of those evenings when the sky outside was caught between dusk and nightfall, a deep navy bleeding into black, and the city lights were just starting to shimmer against the glass walls. I had been gathering my things, sliding my laptop into its bag, when her voice stopped me. It wasn't loud. In fact, it was softer than I was used to hearing it, a gentle thread of sound that carried enough weight to make me pause. "Could you stay a little longer?" she asked, eyes still lowered to the papers on her desk. At first, I thought she meant for work. A last-minute report, perhaps, or some forgotten deadline. But the way she lingered with her pen, tapping it lightly against the edge of the folder, told me it wasn't quite that. There was hesitation in her request, something almost fragile hidden beneath her usual composure. I glanced around the office, rows of dark monitors, chairs tucked neatly under desks, the faint smell of stale coffee in the air. Everything about the space said it was time to go home. And yet she wanted me to stay. I set my bag back down and asked carefully, "Of course. What do you need?" That's when she looked up at me. There was something disarming in her gaze. Normally, in meetings, her eyes held that sharp steadiness, the kind that could quiet a whole room. But tonight they seemed different. Softer. A little tired, as though the day had taken more from her than she was willing to admit. The lamplight on her desk caught the faint shimmer of the silver chain around her neck, glinting as she shifted slightly. For a moment, I felt strangely aware of the distance, or lack of it, between us. Just a few feet of carpet, a desk stacked with papers, and the quiet hum of the building's air conditioning. But it felt like more. She gestured vaguely toward the chair opposite her. "Just sit for a while. I don't want to be here alone." The words were simple, but the honesty in them struck me harder than I expected. This was my boss, a woman who commanded rooms, who carried herself with a grace that was almost untouchable. And here she was, asking me, of all people, to sit with her because she didn't want the silence. I lowered myself into the chair, the leather creaking softly under me. I tried to smile, to make it seem natural, though my chest felt oddly tight. "Sure," I said quietly. "I don't mind." She nodded once, almost in relief, and went back to shuffling her papers, though her movements were slower now, less purposeful. The fluorescent lights above hummed on, but the sound between us was different, quieter, more intimate, as though the whole office had shrunk down to just the two of us. And as I sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight was going to be different, that I don't know how long we sat like that. Her behind the desk, me in the chair opposite, with the faint rustle of paper between us. There was no real task at hand, no urgent reason to stay, yet I didn't move. Something in her silence held me there, as though if I waited long enough, I might begin to understand what she wasn't saying. Then came the sound of heels in the hallway. Slow, steady steps that grew closer, echoing against the marble floor just outside. My boss lifted her head, not startled exactly, but expectant, as though she'd been waiting. The door opened without a knock, and another woman stepped inside. She was around the same age, elegant in a way that didn't need effort. A fitted coat, dark hair swept neatly back, eyes that moved quickly across the room before settling on me. Her expression carried both curiosity and familiarity, as if she already knew why I was there, even if I didn't. "Still here?" she asked lightly, but the question wasn't aimed at me. Her voice had a warmth to it, edged with something playful, directed entirely at my boss. My boss smiled faintly, almost sheepishly. I asked him to stay. The woman glanced at me once more, then closed the door behind her. The soft click of the latch seemed to seal the three of us in. Without a word, she reached for the blinds by the window. One smooth pull, and the long slats rattled downward, cutting off the spill of neon city light that had been glowing across the floor. The office changed in an instant. The sharp brightness of glass and steel gave way to something dimmer, softer. The only light now came from the desk lamp, a warm amber pool that lit the three of us and left the corners of the room in shadow. I remember swallowing hard, suddenly aware of how private it felt. No night sky watching from outside, no passing headlights flickering against the glass. Just the three of us cocooned in this pocket of stillness. The friend shrugged off her coat and draped it neatly over the back of a chair, moving with the kind of calm confidence that suggested she'd been here many times before. She came closer, resting a hand on my boss's shoulder in a gesture that was both casual and protective, fingers lingering there a moment longer than politeness required. My boss exhaled, almost as if the touch grounded her. For the first time that evening, she seemed to relax, shoulders easing slightly as she leaned back in her chair. I sat quietly, unsure of my place in this scene. Their closeness was obvious, the kind that comes from years of trust, but I couldn't help noticing the way the friend's eyes flickered to me every so often, measuring, curious, as though she was silently asking what I meant to her. The blinds were closed now, the office sealed off from the world. And with that simple action, everything felt different. Intimate, unspoken, like a threshold had quietly been crossed, though none of us had yet dared to name it. For a while, none of us spoke. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it carried weight, like each of us was waiting for someone else to begin. My boss turned a page of the file in front of her, though her eyes didn't really seem to follow the words. Her friend remained at her side, one hand still resting lightly on her shoulder, the other tracing idle patterns across the edge of the desk. Finally, my boss broke the silence. Her voice was calm, but there was a tremor just beneath it. "I didn't ask you to stay for work," she said, glancing briefly at me before lowering her gaze again. "I just didn't feel like going home tonight." The honesty in that admission surprised me. It wasn't the kind of thing I expected her to say. Not to me, at least. She always seemed so composed, the type of person who carried responsibility without ever letting the cracks show. Hearing her confess something so simple, so human, caught me off guard. Her friend gave her shoulder a small squeeze, an almost protective gesture. "You've been running on empty for weeks," she murmured softly. "It's okay to admit when you're tired of it all." I watched as my boss let out a breath, the faintest smile tugging at her lips. "Sometimes the apartment feels too quiet," she continued, her voice lower now, as though speaking the truth made her vulnerable. "The silence is worse than the noise." Her friend leaned in closer, brushing a strand of hair away from her face in a gesture that was both tender and habitual, like she'd done it countless times before. Then she looked at me, not accusing, not defensive, but as though she wanted me to understand. I shifted slightly in my chair, the leather creaking in the stillness. "I get it," I said carefully. "Silence has a way of reminding you of what you don't have." My words felt clumsy but genuine. She looked up at me then, and for the first time that night, her eyes truly met mine. There was no boss and employee between us, no formal roles. Just two people admitting they were lonely in different ways. Something softened in her expression, not gratitude exactly, but recognition. Her friend moved to sit on the edge of the desk, crossing one leg over the other, her presence both steady and reassuring. "See," she said gently to her, nodding in my direction. "You're not the only one who feels that way." The three of us sat in that small circle of lamplight, sharing something unspoken. It wasn't dramatic, no tears or confessions that would change the world. Just the quiet vulnerability of admitting that sometimes life feels heavier than you let on. And somehow, that made the air warmer, closer. I could feel the weight of the day slipping away, replaced by a strange sense of connection. Fragile, but real. That it's strange how quickly the heaviness of silence can shift when words finally begin to flow. One moment, the room had felt like it was closing in on us, shadows pressing from the corners, the hush almost suffocating. The next, it was lighter, carried on the current of laughter, of stories, of three voices weaving together in ways I hadn't expected. It started with her friend. She leaned back on the edge of the desk, tilting her head toward me. "Tell me," she said with a playful curiosity, "is she always this serious with you at work?" I smiled, glancing at my boss. She raised her brows, almost daring me to answer. For a second, I hesitated, but then the truth slipped out. "Mostly yes. But every now and then, I catch her laughing when she thinks no one's watching." That earned me a soft laugh from her, the kind that wasn't meant for a boardroom or a client. It was lighter, freer, a sound that made something inside me unwind. She shook her head, covering her face briefly with one hand. "Don't listen to him," she said, though the warmth in her eyes betrayed her amusement. Her friend leaned closer, grinning. "I've been telling you for years, people need to see this side of you more often." What followed wasn't planned, but it felt natural. We began trading little stories, her friend teasing her about old habits, me sharing small moments from the office that made her laugh in ways I hadn't seen before. Soon enough, the formality of boss and employee seemed to fade into the background, replaced by something more human. The conversation meandered, from work deadlines to childhood memories, to the things we missed most about simpler times. She confessed how she sometimes envied the freedom of being younger, how she felt weighed down by expectations that never seemed to ease. Her friend teased her gently, calling her dramatic, but the affection in her tone was undeniable. I found myself speaking more than I expected, too, about dreams I hadn't quite pursued, about the uncertainty of trying to carve out a future when nothing feels certain. They listened, both of them, with an attentiveness that made me feel strangely seen. There were moments of quiet between stories, but they weren't heavy anymore. They were warm, filled with the hum of connection, the soft sound of her hand brushing against a glass of water as she passed it to me, the faint smile lingering on her lips as our eyes met. Her friend noticed, I could tell, though she said nothing, just offered me a knowing look that felt both reassuring and unsettling. By the time I realized how much time had passed, the office no longer felt like a workplace. It was something else entirely, a haven carved out of the city's noise, a space where three people had somehow managed to step outside of their roles and simply exist together. And in that space, I felt the first flicker of something I couldn't yet name. The office had shifted into something unrecognizable from the place I walked into that morning. The overhead lights were still off, the blinds drawn tight, leaving only the amber desk lamp to glow softly against the walls. The hum of the city was gone, replaced by the quiet intimacy of a room that no longer felt professional but personal, almost private. She leaned forward to close her laptop, then paused. "Wait," she murmured, opening it again. "I wanted to show you something." I moved instinctively, rising from my chair and walking around to her side of the desk. She turned the screen toward me, scrolling through a presentation she had been preparing. Her voice was steady, pointing out a few slides, but my focus kept faltering. Because she was so close. Her shoulder brushed against mine as I leaned in to see. The fabric of her blouse was soft, almost silky, and the faint warmth of her body bled through. A strand of her hair slipped loose, grazing my cheek as she tilted her head toward the screen. It was the smallest of touches, but it sent a ripple through me that I tried, unsuccessfully, to hide. I shifted slightly, careful not to lean away too noticeably, but she didn't move. If anything, she leaned in just a fraction more, her perfume, faint floral, unmistakably hers, drifting between us. Her friend, still perched on the edge of the desk, watched the two of us with a quiet smile. Not intrusive, not mocking, just present, her eyes observing with a kind of calm awareness. Then, almost deliberately, she dragged a chair closer across the carpet and sat down beside me, as though to close the distance from the other side. Suddenly, I was surrounded. Not trapped, exactly, but enveloped. The warmth of one shoulder brushing against me, the presence of the other leaning just close enough that I could feel the quiet steadiness of her breathing. My boss tapped the trackpad, her finger accidentally brushing the back of my hand. She didn't pull away immediately. Neither did I. The contact was brief, featherlight, but it lingered in my awareness long after she continued speaking. I nodded at the screen, though I couldn't have repeated half of what she was saying. All I could think about was the closeness, the stillness of the room, and the quiet tension thrumming in the air. Her friend leaned back, crossing her legs with casual grace, her voice smooth. "You work well together," she said softly. There was no teasing in her tone this time, just observation. Maybe even approval. My boss didn't answer, though I noticed the faintest curve of a smile tug at her lips. She clicked to the final slide, then closed the laptop with a quiet snap. And just like that, the touch was gone. But the echo of it, the warmth of her sleeve against mine, the brush of her fingers on my skin, stayed with me, louder than any words. When the laptop closed, the room fell into silence again. Not the heavy silence from earlier, but one charged with something else, a tension I couldn't quite name, though I felt it with every beat of my heart. My instinct was to stand, to break the moment before it became too much. I reached for my bag, fingers curling around the strap, when her hand touched my wrist. It was the lightest touch, her fingertips resting just above the vein, where my pulse raced faster than I wanted her to notice. Yet it stopped me cold. "Stay," she said softly. Not as a request this time, but as something closer to a plea. Her eyes lifted to mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear there. Not fear of me, but fear of being left alone. I didn't know what to say. My throat tightened, caught between wanting to reassure her and the quiet storm of thoughts in my head. She was my boss. I was younger, less certain, standing in a room with two women who seemed to share an unspoken world I was only beginning to glimpse. Was it right to stay? Was it wrong to leave? Her friend, who had been watching quietly, must have sensed the hesitation in my body. She shifted gracefully, leaning forward, her tone calm and steady. She just didn't want to feel alone tonight, she said. Her eyes softened as they found mine. That's all this is. Nothing complicated. The reassurance should have made it easier. And yet, it complicated everything. Because the truth was, I didn't feel like I was intruding. Not anymore. If anything, I felt drawn in. Her fingers still lingered against my wrist. The warmth of her touch radiated through me, quiet but steady, anchoring me in place. My pulse betrayed me, quick and restless beneath her fingertips. She noticed. I could tell by the faint upward curve of her lips, the way her eyes lingered there before lifting back to mine. I lowered my bag, letting it rest against the chair again. Slowly, I eased back down, my body caught between reluctance and desire, between propriety and the pull of something deeper. She didn't move her hand right away. For a few long seconds, it remained where it was, light but certain, until finally she withdrew, as though satisfied that I wasn't going anywhere. Her friend leaned back again, her presence calm, like a steady current flowing beneath the surface. The three of us sat in the circle of lamplight, shadows stretching long across the carpet. I could hear the faint hum of the city beyond the blinds, cars rushing, horns faint in the distance. But here inside, the air felt suspended, fragile, as if one wrong move might shatter it. And still I stayed. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Time seemed to blur after that. We didn't return to the laptop, or to paperwork, or to anything that resembled work at all. The office, so rigid and demanding during the day, had softened into something else entirely. It no longer felt like the place where deadlines pressed and voices rushed. Tonight, it was just a room holding three people who didn't want the night to end too quickly. She leaned back in her chair, a glass of water cradled loosely between her hands. Her friend sat opposite her now, legs crossed, calm and composed, the kind of presence that quietly filled the space without overwhelming it. And me, I stayed where I was, close enough that our shoulders still brushed every so often when she shifted slightly in her seat. We talked, but not about anything urgent. Little things, the kind of conversation that doesn't demand to be remembered, yet lingers anyway. She asked me what I did on weekends, if I ever traveled, what books I kept on my shelf. I answered honestly, and she listened as if each small detail mattered. Every now and then, her friend added something, teasing her about her own weekend habits, or chiming in with a memory that made them both laugh. It was strange, being part of their world like this. Two women who clearly shared years of trust, their friendship woven deep into the fabric of their gestures. And yet, somehow, they allowed me into it, as though my presence wasn't an intrusion, but a quiet addition. At one point, her head tipped gently against my shoulder. It happened so naturally, I almost didn't notice at first. One moment she was laughing softly. The next she was leaning into me, the weight of her head settling just above my chest. Her hair brushed against my neck, carrying the faint scent of her perfume, light, floral, calming. I froze for a heartbeat, unsure if I should move, if I should allow it. But then her friend caught my eyes from across the desk. She smiled, small, knowing, approving. And in that moment, I realized there was nothing to question. She wasn't my boss here. She wasn't the untouchable figure she had always seemed to be during the day. She was just a woman, tired and vulnerable, finding comfort in leaning against someone who cared enough to stay. So I stayed. I let my shoulder be hers to rest on, feeling the gentle rhythm of her breathing ease into steadiness. The room grew quieter, the shadows longer, until even the hum of the city outside felt far away. When I finally stood to leave, much later, it was with a kind of reluctance. She lifted her head slowly, blinking as if waking from a dream. Her friend rose too, resting a gentle hand on my arm as she whispered, "Thank you." I nodded, unable to trust my voice, because I understood what she meant. That night ended without promises, without dramatic declarations. Just a warmth that lingered long after I walked out into the cool night air. Something had shifted, subtle, quiet, but undeniable. And though I didn't yet know what it meant, I knew one thing for certain. I would never forget the way she rested against me, or how it felt to be needed, if only for a night.